Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 83, which is headlined by a bantamweight fight between Song Yadong versus Chris Gutierrez. It's a great main event. It actually supposed to have been in Shanghai, this event. I've still got no idea why. The UFC cancelled the event in Shanghai, the location, and changed it over to Vegas. It's been a bit of a workaround, but we've still got an event. And from a fight on paper type of card, it doesn't look overly great, if I'm being honest. From an overview perspective, there are some really good individual fights, but from an overall card perspective, it doesn't look the strongest. But more often than not, over the years, it's these types of cards that you don't get overly excited for that end up delivering, and it'll actually do a good job if it goes anywhere close to last week, which was insane. So, yeah, this event's in Vegas, supposed to have been in Shanghai, and we'll see what we get from the actual fights itself, opposed to just looking at the fight on paper. Just before we get started though, just a reminder about the Baze AI recaps. For now, I am going to be stopping doing these just because there's plenty of recaps out there after each event in regards to, education, how to use Baze AI to bet, and if you're a fun gambler or if you want to use Baze AI long term, there's different ways of going about it, and there's plenty out there already. So for now, like I say, there won't be a recap after each event, but if you do want to learn about Baze AI, or if you are interested in AI for MMA in the UFC, then we've got plenty on our YouTube channel in the Baze AI specific playlist, and that's youtube.com/MMA Play 365. But now let's get straight into the breakdowns, and of course, as always, we start with the main event, and it's the bantamweight main event, Song Yadong versus Chris Gutierrez. I think Song Yadong's going to be a little bit gutted that this wasn't out in Asia. I think that, in Shanghai, in China, this would have been a really fun event for him to headline. Of course, he'll have had all the crowd behind him, and he would have been the superstar that everyone's screaming his name and all that sort of stuff. So I do think he's going to be a little bit gutted. But in regards to, this event in Vegas, he's still got his fight. He's still got his main event. It's not quite now what it was supposed to be, but, it's a main event nonetheless. And it's a really good fight as well. Now, the one thing I will just say right off the bat is, look, when this fight was first announced, I thought, yep, it's a good fight for Song Yadong. Obviously, at the time, it was in China. You look at the betting line, and Song Yadong's like a -300, -350 favourite. So, at the time, like I say, before I've taped it, I've thought, it's a great fight for Song Yadong. He's going to come in here. He's going to be given a platform and a really good opponent, by the way, in Chris Gutierrez, to be able to shine, make that step further towards the, the top of the division, potentially looking at a title shot. But actually, after running the tape, I'm not saying that Song Yadong is going to lose this fight. I'm not saying that Song Yadong shouldn't be a favourite. I think he is rightfully favoured. I just think the line's maybe a little bit misleading. Because the thing is with Chris Gutierrez, yes, he's not as solid of a striker in regards to being aggressive, dangerous, explosive as what Song Yadong is. But Chris Gutierrez has got this striking game that's very logical, methodical. He'll break you down. His leg kicks are nasty. He really hurts the legs of the majority of the fighters that he fights against. And he's had leg kick stoppages as well. And it's not just Chris Gutierrez. It's a lot of guys out of the same gym as well. A gym with Mark Montoya at Factory X that I actually love a lot. I like all those guys that come out of there. They're all solid. They're all exciting. They're all well-rounded. And you can tell it's fighters out of their gym because they all fight in a certain way, and Chris Gutierrez is one of those guys. And like I say, if he comes out here and really starts getting off on these low kicks on Song Yadong straight away, it could be a very long night for Song Yadong. I'm being serious. If those low kicks start taking an effect in round 1 and round 2, and Song Yadong, hasn't got Chris Gutierrez out of there, then that leg starts hurting and he can't walk on it. Song Yadong is going to lose a lot of elements of his game, like I say, with the aggression, the explosivity, the combinations. You need a lead leg for that. And the one thing that I kind of feel that Song Yadong's got in this fight that he might not have had in his latest previous fights, if that makes sense, is I kind of feel that he might be able to get his wrestling again in this fight. We saw it earlier in his UFC career. It's just he turned into this crazy explosive striker that was knocking people out and had insane power, but Song Yadong's got a decent wrestling game, and he's also a good topside grappler as well when he's fighting the right opponent. Now, Chris Gutierrez isn't a slouch with his wrestling and grappling, but Song Yadong is just better, and I think that this is maybe one of the first fights in quite a while where Song Yadong might have that wrestling and grappling advantage. So this is an additional path to victory, but again, going back to Chris Gutierrez and the low kicks, if he does really get off on those kicks early on, then Song Yadong again is going to need that lead leg to explode into, or maybe not explode into, but, you know, find his entries into the takedowns and get his wrestling going. So it really does come down to the low kicks of Gutierrez, in my opinion, because if Gutierrez doesn't get off on these low kicks, sure, he might have some success in rounds, but I do think Song Yadong will overwhelm him with aggression, forward pressure and volume. And then if he does decide to go with the wrestling, then again, I think that Gutierrez will get out-wrestled, potentially out-grappled as well. But like I said, and like I keep going back to, this low kick is an absolute equalizer, and for that reason, I do think that the line should be closer. But for the sake of the pick and prediction, it's hard to pick against Song, even though Chris Gutierrez has got this amazing weapon with the low kicks. It's hard to pick against Song that seems to be, you know, better everywhere outside of that low kick. It's just, like I said, the hesitation that I've got is the low kicks are that damaging. Like, look at what Jonathan Martinez does. Look what he did to Adrian Yanez last time out. Adrian Yanez was like Song Yadong in a way. He was the faster, more explosive striker with good hands, good knockout power. And Jonathan Martinez just took all of that away with the low kicks and ended up stopping him with the low kicks. So that's an example of a fight that's very similar to what we've got here. But like I say, it is tough when I'm predicting a fight and making a pick that I'm going to take off all the advantages that Song Yadong's going to have with the hands and with the wrestling just because of Gutierrez's low kicks, even though it is an equalizer. Again, I just feel like I'm just keep repeating myself, but you understand where I'm coming from. From a pick and prediction, I'm picking Song Yadong to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a short notice fight for Anthony Smith as he's fighting Khalil Rountree Jr. Now, I'm a little bit annoyed about this because Khalil Rountree was supposed to be fighting Azamat Murzakanov. He was an underdog. This is supposed to have gone down last weekend, but Murzakanov pulled from the card and Smith has stepped in, and then they moved it to this event. The reason I'm annoyed is because Rountree was an underdog against Murzakanov, and I was going to bet against Murzakanov, so I was betting on Rountree. I had the breakdown written, ready to go, ready to pull the trigger on a bet, and of course, you know, the fight fell through. I do like Khalil Rountree in his last couple of fights. I feel like he's definitely turning into a very dangerous fight. I mean, he's always been dangerous with his, you know, with his explosivity and with his power, but I think he's starting to put together some nice performances. He's starting to beat the fighters that are, in my opinion, technically better than him, and he's really starting to piece together everything really well. Now, Anthony Smith stepping in on short notice is a definite concern for Smith, but Smith has the experience. He's more well-rounded as well, so, you know, sure, you know, Smith can strike, and he will be competitive with Rountree when it comes to the striking, but Smith's got good wrestling and good jiu-jitsu as well, especially with the jiu-jitsu. That's a big gap in skill here against Rountree. It's just, can Anthony Smith take Rountree down? And it's going to be difficult because of the explosivity of Rountree, because of how hard he hits. Like, if Smith comes into range to test the waters, have a look to see if there's an entry for, you know, a takedown, and to get the wrestling going, and gets cracked hard with something, it's going to cause instant hesitation on Smith's side, and that's going to be a detriment to him because it's just going to allow Rountree to come forwards. And like I say, from a technical striking perspective, I'd still probably argue that Anthony Smith's the better technical striker, but man, the aggression and forward pressure of Rountree, and the dude's just nasty as well. Like, we don't see many people that, you know, chopping down with these oblique kicks to the knees. Obviously, he caused serious damage to Modestas Bukauskas in that fight. And then we've seen this twice from him as well, what I'm about to mention next, but that body kick whilst the fight is turtled up, again, we don't see that from any other fighter either. And he's just nasty. There's no other word for it. Like, the dude's dangerous, he's powerful, but he's just nasty. He just wants to hurt his opponent in any way possible. And, like, I do like what he's doing at the minute, Rountree. I think he is turning into a completely reformed fighter. I think he's looking like a fighter that not many are going to want to fight against. He's going to be difficult to take down because of his aggressive nature and his dangerous style. He's also going to be... He's difficult to keep down as well. Like, you look at the fight with Yong, he had to take him down 6 times in one round just to get him out of there. Like, Rountree does a good job of springing back up to his feet. But in this fight with Smith, I just think Smith has, at this point, might have taken a little bit too much damage. I think he is going to get hit with hard shots, hard combinations, and I think he's going to get overwhelmed with that forward pressure and aggressive nature of Rountree. So for those reasons, I'm picking Khalil Rountree Jr. to win this fight. And in the next fight in the flyweight division, this is a fight that I like a lot. 2 fighters that, by the way, you know, if you've been following MMA Play 365 for a while, or myself, you know, you're going to know that I really like these 2 fighters. We've got Sumudaerji versus Allan Nascimento. So yeah, it sucks that both of them are meeting each other. We're going to have a winner, but look, this is MMA, and this is at the highest level in the UFC, and, you know, we all love to have these high-level fights, and that's one that I think that we've got here. Maybe 2 names that a casual fan may not have heard of, but, you know, 2 fighters that are really fun to watch, well-rounded, will bring it in the cage, will fight at 100 miles an hour for 3 straight rounds hard. So, yeah, we've got a great fight ahead of us here. Now, the thing is, I kind of wish that I liked Sumudaerji in this fight more than what I do. I think that Allan Nascimento stylistically has got a great fight ahead of him here. Like, Sumudaerji for me is still going to be the better striker. He's taller, longer, a little bit more elusive. He will pack more power as well, and it's that deceiving power, like the straight punches that he throws out that don't really look like too much, that do end up doing damage. If not initially, then it racks up through accumulation of the volume. But Allan Nascimento, the grappling is a massive gap in skill in this fight. I think that Sumudaerji's shown holes in his grappling multiple times, of course, early on in his UFC career, but even, you know, last time out against Matt Schnell, which, by the way, is that fight, I did mention this on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, that this fight is not spoken about enough. Like, that's one of the best fights that you'll ever see. Legitimately unbelievable. And that round 2, like I say, it's probably... Off the top of my head, it might be the best round, maybe outside of Clay Guida and Diego Sanchez, that we've ever seen in the UFC. Just an unbelievable fight. So if you've not watched it, go back and watch it. But yeah, so even Sumudaerji in that fight, he showed holes in his grappling. And the thing is with Allan Nascimento, he's probably the best grappler that Sumudaerji's ever fought. He's got good wrestling to go with it, but he can strike as well. Allan Nascimento can, and he will use the striking initially just, you know, for volume, but then he'll have the striking in mind for the wrestling and the grappling, you know, striking to find his entries into a takedown. And I think that Sumudaerji, if he doesn't hurt Nascimento early in this fight, I think Nascimento is going to find the takedowns. I think he's going to find the back and submit Sumudaerji. Like, he's that good on the mat. Obviously comes out of this Charles Oliveira camp as well, with all these other new era explosive Brazilian fighters that tend to be, you know, powerful with great grappling also. I just feel, like I say, if Sumudaerji doesn't find that target early in the fight, that I'm not saying necessarily knocks Nascimento out, but just hurts him enough and stings him enough to make Nascimento's game just drop dramatically and cause hesitation and all that sort of stuff, then I think that Nascimento's going to get inside, get takedowns, and he might even only need 1 takedown to finish the fight. So I don't always like going, well, I very rarely go with the fighter that has that small window of opportunity early in a fight, and I'm not going to start here either. So for those reasons, I'm picking Allan Nascimento to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is probably the best fight on the entire card. We've got Nasrat Haqparast versus Jamie Mullarkey. And I say it's probably the best fight on the card just because we've got both fighters here that bring the heat, that bring the aggression, bring the pressure, will bite down on the mouthpiece, will eat a punch to land a punch. And yeah, I feel like it's going to be fireworks from start to finish. Stylistically here, I think it's interesting because, look, Nasrat Haqparast really does a good job of his fights with his hand speed, you know, putting combinations together, and he's got power and he's very quick with these combinations as well. But what I think is going to be the issue for Haqparast in this fight is he tends to find more success when he's the one that can dictate the pace and the range of the fight. The range specifically, like when he decides when it's time to move in and out of range, he's very good with that. He's very good at sliding in at range with good timing, putting a good combination together, exiting and angling out of range, and then coming back in again when he chooses. But when it's him that's getting pressured and he's not the one dictating that pace and range, then I feel like that's when Haqparast can be got at. And he's not bad at that initial counter. So when an opponent comes in on him, he's got that initial good counter on the back foot. But again, a fighter who is very pressure heavy like Jamie Mullarkey, that will come forward, that will bite down on the mouthpiece, he's got that dog in him. I kind of feel that that's the type of fighter that might end up getting at Haqparast and breaking him. And that's the type of fight that I expect here. I do expect Haqparast to have good moments in this fight. I do think he's going to land on Jamie Mullarkey. Like I said, his hand speed and his combinations are really good, but that forward pressure from Mullarkey, closing the distance, crowding the combination striker, forcing them on the back foot, I think that's, again, the type of fighter that Haqparast can struggle against. And I think if Jamie Mullarkey does come out in that fashion in regards to just putting the pressure on, closing the distance and, overwhelming Haqparast with that forward pressure, I think he's going to get at him. And look, this is a really, really great fight. I think it's a fight that's got fight of the night written all over it as well. But for the sake of the pick and prediction, I'm picking Jamie Mullarkey to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Andre Muniz versus Junyoung Park. And it's an interesting fight, this. I feel like it's going to be a very competitive fight. And I also kind of feel that the line is way off in this fight. Like, there's some crazy, I don't know whether it's recency bias or market overcorrection, but like, I feel that the bookies are just off here. And the reason why is, look, go back to Muniz's first fight against Bartosz Fabinski, who was an underdog. And you go to the next fight against Jacare Souza, he was an underdog. He finished both of those fights in the first round. Then he proceeds to be a rightful favourite against Eric Anders, against Uriah Hall, which, again, he looked great in both of those fights as well. Then he's a favourite against Brendan Allen, and he loses. But then he's favoured again against Paul Craig, and he loses. So I kind of feel like the bookies just coming off back-to-back losses as a favourite. I feel like the bookies are looking at this fight and thinking, well, we can't make Andre Muniz the favourite again. But the thing is here, I don't feel that this is the right fight to do that in, because I think that this fight's a very close and competitive fight. And look, if you remove those two fights against Paul Craig and Brendan Allen, then Andre Muniz is a minus 250 favourite in this fight, without a doubt. So it's those two fights against Allen and Craig that's causing Muniz to be an underdog in this fight. And I think that, look, if you look at the fights on paper or just the results against Paul Craig and Allen, obviously it doesn't look great for Muniz, but if you actually watch those fights, specifically the Brendan Allen fight, Muniz's striking has actually gotten a lot better. Like, he's predominantly a grappler, he's an elite BJJ player, he's still competitive at the high levels in BJJ as well, and he's a very dangerous fighter when the fight hits the mat. Now, one of his holes going back a few fights was the fact that his striking wasn't that great and he did need to get fights down to the mat. And then there was the cardio issue of he's constantly trying to look for takedowns, which is draining the gas tank. But like I said, recent fights have shown developments in his striking, and he's not a phenomenal striker. Junyoung Park is, in my opinion, is still the better striker in this fight. It's just Andre Muniz is getting more and more competitive with his striking. It's getting better. And that might be all Muniz needs here to just be able to be competitive with the striking and then to try and take Park down. And of course, at that point, Muniz is fighting in his world and he could potentially, look to either keep Park down or try and get him out of there. But look, I've spent a long time on Muniz just because I do think the line's wide. But look, from Park's perspective, he is a good fighter as well. Like I say, he's going to be the better striker here. I do like the fact that Park paces himself and works very well in regards to stepping on the gas at the right times. And talking of the gas, he has got a really good gas tank. He's a well-rounded fighter. He's put a lot of work into his wrestling and grappling over the last 3 or 4 fights. Like when he first came to the UFC, he was very much a striker, but he's done a lot of work with the wrestling and grappling and won fights via wrestling and grappling as well. And I kind of feel like with some fighters, they fall in love with the KO. I kind of feel like Parks fell in love with taking fighters down and beating on them whilst they're on the back. He does enjoy doing it, but again, that's one path to victory that he's had in previous fights that you kind of feel like if he goes down that route in this fight, he's just going to be played into Muniz's game. So I actually don't think Park's going to look for takedowns. And if he does, I think he might be making a mistake. Like, I know Muniz can play guard a little bit off his back, but Muniz's grappling versus Park's grappling is just a completely different level. So I don't think it'd be a smart move from Park. I think where Park does beat Muniz is with that pace, that pressure that he puts on him. Park's going to have to defend some takedowns. Park is susceptible to being taken down. We have seen it in previous fights. So again, it's just a real interesting matchup because Park won't have the wrestling that he normally has in other fights, previous fights, or at least he probably shouldn't on paper go down that route. But he is the better striker, with the better pacing, with the better cardio, but it's just Muniz, like I say, he's developing his striking to be competitive. That might be enough to be able to close the distance and get Park down and, you know, be the threat that he should be. So, yeah, look, it's a close and competitive fight. I just think the line's off, but I am actually going to side with the underdog in this fight. I do think that the specialist in Muniz, if he can get this fight down to the mat, that it's going to show. And we've seen Park taken down. We've seen him controlled by good BJJ players. Like you look at Gregory Rodriguez, he had some really good moments against Park. But even Muniz, in my opinion, is a level above Gregory Rodriguez with the jiu-jitsu. So if Rodriguez is having success down there against Park, I think Muniz can as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Andre Muniz to win this fight. And talking of close and competitive fights, we've got another one here. We've got Kenan Song versus Kevin Jousset. Kevin Jousset fighting out of City Kickboxing in Australia, coming off a win in his UFC debut. Kenan Song, a big underdog last time out against Rolando Bedoya. A lot of people were betting against Song, and Song came through as an underdog. The thing is with Song, like, I don't like his volume. He doesn't really put combinations together too well. He can get outworked in fights, and I think that's going to happen in this fight with Kevin Jousset. I think Jousset, again, he doesn't have crazy volume, but I do think from a hard work perspective inside the cage on the night, I think Jousset will work a little bit harder than Song. But the thing is with Song is he just hits so hard. Even his jab is like a solid stinging jab, and, you know, he's got power in both hands, so if he hits you with a hook on the jaw, he's got power. He's dropped fighters. I mean, he dropped Ian Garry, and, you know, potentially I had people thinking Ian Garry was going to take his first loss to Song in that first round, and bear in mind, Garry was like a minus 600 favourite or something that night as well, and sure, Song didn't finish him, and then Garry outworked him, but, you know, Garry is the better fighter, but still, like, Song nearly had Garry out of there. So would I be shocked if Jousset was doing good work in this fight and then Song clipped him and knocked him out? Well, no, absolutely not, because that's what Song does. So this is what makes it a close fight and a difficult fight to predict, because yes, you've got the work rate on Jousset's side, but you've got the power on Song's side that is such an equalizer, and the knockdowns, or a fighter even doing like the chicken dance, stanky leg, whatever you want to call it, like those moments, whether an opponent is rocked badly or dropped, can outdo everything else that's happened in that round. So Jousset could have 4.5 minutes in a round where he's putting a clinic on Song, and then bang, Song drops him, Song steals the round. That's how it works, and that's what makes this fight difficult. And I'm actually going to be leaning over to the underdog here in Kenan Song as well. I think that, look, exactly that. Jousset could be doing all the best work in this fight, but that one shot that rocks or hurts Jousset so badly or drops him, it could either lead to a finish, or if it doesn't lead to a finish, Song can steal the round, and he could do that in at least 2 rounds out of the 3. So, and again, it's not as if Song's fighting somebody that's an absolute cardio machine that will put 100 plus significant strikes in a fight in Jousset. Jousset won't work that hard, so it's not as if there's a big gap in skill in the volume department here. It's just, I just don't like Song's volume, and he does get outworked. It's just, like I say, the power against the slight volume advantage for Jousset leads me over to Song. So for those reasons, I'm picking Kenan Song to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Hyun Sung Park versus Shannon Ross, and again, it's an interesting fight. Look, Shannon Ross is on a 3-fight losing streak. The Contender Series fight against Vinicius Salvador, and then the 2 subsequent fights in the UFC. He's fought some decent opponents, to be honest, but being on a 3-fight losing streak and being finished in all 3 fights it just doesn't fill you with a load of confidence against a UFC caliber fighter in his next UFC fight. And look, he probably will win one out of his, what I'm assuming is a 4-fight UFC contract. I don't know. This is definitely a step down in competition from his previous opponents, I'll say that much. But Hyun Park also isn't like a crazy knockout artist. Of course, he's got power. Of course, he could finish Ross, but he's not got the same knockout power that Ross has dealt with before. And Park also doesn't have that overwhelming volume with his strikes and his combinations that Shannon Ross has seen before in this 3-fight losing streak. So this is a better fight for Shannon Ross, is what I'm trying to say. And Shannon Ross is a dog in there. Like, it takes quite a lot for him to get him out of there. So I don't think Park's going to get him out of there on the feet. Where I think Park's going to have success here is with the wrestling and grappling. Now, Park is a better grappler than he is a wrestler, but he can still get fights down to the mat. I think if he stands there with Shannon Ross and thinks that he can knock him out, it's going to give Shannon Ross opportunities to actually cause a big upset here, because Park's like a -500 favourite, and Shannon Ross is the bigger dog in this fight. And I don't mean from a betting perspective, I just mean from a heart perspective, biting down on the mouthpiece, digging deep and, scrapping. He's a dog inside of there. Park doesn't have that same dog in him. But like I say, if Park is smart here, looks for the takedown, looks to get his grappling going, Park's a really good grappler. He's tricky to deal with. He does find the back. He can choke you out. So I kind of feel like the fight's going to go that route. But like I say, some fighters will stand and accept a brawl. And if Park does that, I'm not saying that he's going to lose, but he's going to give Ross plenty of opportunities to come away with an upset, according to the bookies' odds in this fight. Like I say, I just think that Park is going to use the wrestling and grappling. I think he is going to take Shannon Ross down, and I think there is going to be a sizable gap in skill when it comes to the offensive grappling of Park versus the defensive grappling of Ross. So for those reasons, I'm picking Hyun Park to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Steve Garcia versus Costa. So that might sound very similar to a breakdown podcast that you've listened to recently, and that's because the fight should have gone down last weekend, but I think it was on the morning of the weigh-ins, it was announced that there was an illness, I believe, on Steve Garcia's side that caused the fight to be scrapped. You might be looking at a stomach bug or food poisoning or something. Again, we don't know the details, but I've been around that many fighters and seen this sort of stuff happen where they've just ate something a little bit dodgy and not felt too well, and the fact that it's actually rescheduled the week after tells me that it wasn't something serious either. The other thing I quite like what the UFC have done is this initially was a featherweight fight. Both fighters are featherweight, but this will actually be at lightweight, just so both fighters aren't having to cut twice in 2 weeks. It's smart, it makes sense. I really like it when the UFC do that. So yeah, this is a lightweight fight that should have happened last weekend. And look, go back to the breakdown that I did for this fight last weekend. It doesn't change. I am picking Costa to win the fight. I think that from a dog perspective, just like I said with Shannon Ross, Steve Garcia's got the dog in him and he's dangerous and he's, a bit awkward and unorthodox and he's got skills everywhere. But I think Costa's more grounded. I think he's more technical. I think that he won't get overwhelmed with the pressure that Garcia puts on him. I think from a striking perspective, it's probably where the fight's won and lost. And I just think Costa puts together some nice strikes with power, really finds the target. Also, like I said, Steve Garcia, I believe, was the one that was ill last week. And again, when you're looking at small margins and small edges in this game, which at this level in the UFC, you want those small 1% edges over your opponent. Garcia was ill last week and, he'll be fine now. But again, the small edges, it doesn't lead me to wanting to change my pick and go the other way, if that makes sense. If anything, it solidifies my pick even more. So again, for a more extensive breakdown, if you want to jump on to last week's podcast, you're more than welcome to, but I'm picking Costa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Stephanie Egger versus Luana Santos. Stylistically, I think this is a really interesting fight. Luana Santos is still a little bit of an unknown though. I actually went back to my breakdown last time out just to see how I broke that fight down after I taped it, and it was how I thought, but not how I thought the fight would play out. And what I mean by that is, look, Luana Santos looks good when she's wrestling, getting topside, and she will look for plenty of takedowns. But last time out against Juliana Miller, like, she put a striking clinic on. So now I'm thinking, well, okay, she's a decent wrestler, she's a good topside grappler, she's very calm and relaxed in that world of jiu-jitsu, but she's also got a striking clinic in her as well. So now I'm thinking, well, Luana Santos is a more well-rounded fighter than we actually think. But the question being asked is, against Juliana Miller, did her striking just look better just because Miller doesn't have the best technical striking? And, we'll find out. But I don't think we're going to find out in this fight because, again, Stephanie Egger isn't known for her striking. She's known for her judo, getting close, throwing her opponents down to the mat, and then she's got a good submission game, a good grappling game herself. So it just begs the question in this fight, how the fight's going to be won and lost. And I kind of feel that if Santos can defend the takedowns or, break away from the clinches before the throws of Egger, then Santos might actually be able to keep this fight standing and piece Egger up just like she did with Juliana Miller. But then if you are looking at a fight that's won and lost with the grappling, then it's whichever fighter, and I know this is a cliche, but it's whichever fighter is on top more often than not that will do the good work. Because I think if it's Egger underneath Santos, as good of a grappler as Egger is, I don't think she does that much with Santos on top of her. I think Santos's offensive grappling will be better than Egger's defensive grappling. And I kind of feel the same thing the other way around. It's just, I trust Santos more on bottom than what I would Egger in regards to either, throw up submission attempts or look to stand back up or hit a sweep or reversal. I think Santos is going to be a little bit better there, specifically in the stand-up. So in a close fight, which I believe this is going to be, I feel that Santos does have the edge in the striking. I feel like she does have a slight edge in the grappling as well, with actually getting the fights down to the mat. I think the judo of Egger is very interesting. That could be an interesting aspect of this fight if she can continuously get takedowns on Santos. But I do think Santos is the better fighter overall. Like I say, if this fight's standing, Santos wins. And I do think that Santos could potentially take Egger down as well and do good work on top of her. So for those reasons, I'm picking Luana Santos to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Daniel Marcos versus Carlos Vera. I've actually got no idea when this fight was added. It was definitely, I think, within the last 24 to 48 hours. So it is a short notice fight. I didn't see this on Topology a couple of days ago. So yeah, Daniel Marcos, Carlos Vera. And I think that this is a really good fight for Daniel Marcos. I was hoping the bookies kind of messed this up a little bit because I believe they did that with the Daniel Marcos Victor Hugo fight. I did have a 4.5 unit bet, I think it was, on Daniel Marcos against Victor Hugo around minus 225 or something like that. It was a nice line, a line that I thought should have been up at minus 400, minus 450, and that's exactly where we've got this fight. I think when I looked, a few moments ago, I think it was around minus 430. So yeah, the bookies haven't messed up here. I think that Carlos Vera is actually quite tricky, to be fair. He is 36 years old, coming off the last series of The Ultimate Fighter. He was on Team McGregor, and his style is really strange. So if you look at his record on paper, he's got plenty of submissions, so you'd think he's a grappler, but he's a switch stance striker. He throws some kicks from weird angles, and he's game for a fight. Even though, like I say, he's 36, he is up there in age, he is game for a fight. He will throw down. He went to a 2-round decision against Brad Katona, was beaten comfortably. But yeah, he's not the easiest fighter to make reads on. But the thing is with Daniel Marcos, he is an elite striker. So even though Carlos Vera is a little bit awkward, a little bit unorthodox, maybe throws some strikes that you don't typically see from, different angles, I think Daniel Marcos will get his reads relatively quickly on this. I don't think it's a read that he'll have initially. So of course, Marcos and his team will have watched tape on Vera and they might think they know what they're dealing with, but when they actually get in the cage against Vera. I think it'll be different, maybe for about 60 seconds, 90 seconds. But Marcos, I think, will get his reads pretty quickly here. I think he's just going to piece Carlos Vera up. I don't think Vera is going to be too competitive with him on the feet. I think Marcos's shot selection is better. I think he's technically more sound. I think he's going to be faster, moving forwards, moving backwards as well. Like if Vera does feel okay and putting pressure on Daniel Marcos, Marcos is elite at fighting on the back foot, just as good as he is fighting moving forward. So I think it's going to cause Vera a lot of problems. If Vera tries to take Marcos down, which I think might be a possibility, like when Vera realises he's outmatched on the feet, he might go for takedowns. But the thing is with Marcos, like, he doesn't have bad takedown defence. He can be taken down, like he's not immune to it, but his get-up game's good. He doesn't mess around on his back. He doesn't play around. He doesn't make too many mistakes either. He gets his back to the cage and starts working his way back up. And I don't think Vera's going to be able to keep him down for too long, if he even does take him down. And I think it's just going to make Marcos just really flourish in the fight, come on strong, and really start putting it on Carlos Vera. So yeah, ultimately here, look, I like Vera as a fighter. I think he could be tricky for certain opponents. I just don't think he's going to be tricky for Daniel Marcos. I think Marcos is going to be better pretty much everywhere, but predominantly I think this fight is going to be won and lost on the feet, and Marcos is just going to be too much for Vera. So for those reasons, I'm picking Daniel Marcos to win this fight. And in the next fight, I've got no idea why this fight is, at least at this point, is, you know, the second fight of the night. I think that this fight should be much higher. We've got Tatsuro Taira versus Carlos Hernandez. Now, if Carlos Hernandez hadn't fought Allan Nascimento, I do think my prediction might have been not different. Like, I still would have picked Taira to win the fight, and of course just dropped a spoiler there. But I think I would be talking more of it's going to be a more close and competitive fight than the odds suggest. But after seeing Carlos Hernandez get taken down by Allan Nascimento, shows his back instantly, got his back took instantly, I think that this is just going to be a huge nightmare for Carlos Hernandez, because I do think that Tatsuro Taira is going to get takedowns in this fight. I think Hernandez, you know, if that's just what he's like, if he is just prone to turning his back to trying to stand back up, I think Taira's going to take his back and finish the fight if Carlos Hernandez shows his back again. Even if he doesn't show his back and, you know, he's learned from that mistake, I think Taira's going to be able to keep him down for long periods of time and do good work on top. Even with the striking, I think that Carlos Hernandez he's got a better chance of beating Taira in the striking department than he does with wrestling and grappling, but Taira is still a decent striker himself. You know, he's long, he's explosive, he'll use his kicks in his hands. I think it's competitive on the feet is what I'd say, but when you start mixing in the wrestling and grappling, which Taira nearly always does, I think that Hernandez is going to get blown out of the water like he did against Nascimento. So for those reasons, I'm picking Tatsuro Taira to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Hyun dos Santos versus Talita Alencar. So this is a really good fight, actually. We've got dos Santos, that was the Invicta Atomweight champion. Of course, there's no Atomweight in the UFC, so she is fighting at strawweight, but she's fought heavier before anyway, so it's not as if she was a natural Atomweight. She probably just took an Atomweight championship fight because, you know, it was a good opportunity to become a champion. Then you've got Alencar on the other side, who has been signed from the Dana White Contender Series, and she was signed off a draw as well, so that tells you that she must have some ability if the UFC is signing a fighter from the Contender Series from a draw, not even a win. So yeah, stylistically, they're two very different fighters. Hyun dos Santos is more of a well-rounded fighter. Like, she's pretty good everywhere, but doesn't, you know, excel in one specific area. Like, she's an okay striker. She will put some power in her strikes from time to time. She can wrestle. She does have some good grappling, top side and bottom side as well. So, like I say, she's very well-rounded. But with Talita Alencar, she is more of a specialist, and that's with the grappling. High-level grappler, a ton of grappling experience, you know, still competing actively in grappling as well. Legit black belt. And when she gets on top of opponents, you can see that. You can see the jiu-jitsu, that it's very good. She can initially struggle to keep her opponent down, but once she's hit a few takedowns on certain opponents, she can start doing good work on top. And she's just very comfortable in every position on top of her opponent. Even on bottom, she's fine. You know, she can work her way back up or hit a sweep and reversal. When she's on bottom, she does tend to look to start standing back up and then look to re-wrestle, grab a single leg and look to try and take her opponent down so she can keep the fight on the ground. And again, that stops her from getting fully up and then having to, rework her wrestling and get another takedown. Her wrestling's okay as well. She can get her opponents down. She's a difficult fighter to deal with. The big problem with Alencar is, like I said, she's been signed from the Contender Series from a draw. Now, what happened in that fight is she was dominant round 1, she was dominant round 2, completely gassed out, and then she lost a 10-8 round in the third round. Wasn't finished, but then, she was at that point where super tired, shooting desperation takedowns without setting the takedowns up with hands or strikes, shooting from quite far out, making the takedowns telegraphed easily for her opponents. That's got to be something that she works on because she's a very, very good fighter. Even her striking's okay. Like, she's not a terrible striker. She's obviously just a better grappler. But she's got to work on that cardio and that pacing, because if she is shooting takedowns, she's got to make sure she's got the gas tank to shoot the takedowns. And I don't think that's the worst thing to have to work on as part of your development as a fighter, because she's already a specialist. So with Hyun Dos Santos has got better cardio, but even still, like, you go back and watch that Atomweight Championship fight, like, she put a few hard strikes together over the first couple of rounds and did slow down dramatically. Like, she was much better round 1 and round 2 than what she was, in the subsequent rounds after that. Just slowed down. Her opponent slowed down as well, but so it didn't make it look terrible. But yeah, look, Santos hasn't got this, like, holy grail gas tank either. So it's going to be a really interesting fight, and it always is when you've got a specialist versus someone that's so well-rounded. It's just more often than not, I will lean towards the specialist because they are dangerous and they are great in one specific area. And if Alencar does get Hyun Dos Santos down in 2 rounds, then she's got every chance of winning the fight. Of course, you can go back to a Contender Series fight and say, well, if she gets 10-8'd in the last round, then obviously that takes those first 2 rounds away, but at least she wouldn't have lost the fight. So, yeah, it's a fight that's very interesting. I do like the fact that Hyun Dos Santos is well-rounded and, she's going to be a more levelled fighter, shall we say, than Alencar. But I like that Alencar is a specialist. She knows she's a specialist and she works towards that game plan every fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Talita Alencar to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. Like I say, I'm really interested to see how these fights play out because on paper, no disrespect, it's from an overview perspective, it's not the best card. But, I do hope that these fights deliver and we do get a really fun fight night on Saturday night. If you are on YouTube, please drop a comment. Please talk. Tell me what fights you're interested in. Tell me what fights you're betting. Tell me if we disagree on a fight. I do genuinely try and get back to every single comment that is left on there. It does help the YouTube channel and the algorithms as well. Helps us grow. And again, if you don't subscribe to the channel, please drop us a subscription. It takes 2 seconds. It's of no detriment to you, but really helps the channel as well. So if I ever have helped you with predictions or cash-in bets, then yeah, please do me a favor and just drop a subscription. Of course, if you're listening on one of the podcast platforms, you are also more than welcome to drop over to YouTube and, start a conversation with me as well. And yeah, that's it. Enjoy the fights on Saturday night. And we'll be back again next week for that box office blockbuster event at UFC 296. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. And I'll see you again next week.